Hello, everybody, and hello, Zoomland. How you doing out there? Welcome to the Mono Basin Historical Society July meeting on July 3rd. So we have a great show tonight by Bob Marks. It'll be very exciting to learn about some history of this area and this land, which is very important. But first, I'm going to ask our historian if she would like to say a few words. Let me bring it to her.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been very busy this spring. Of course, we have our big project on digitizing the binders, and I have started that, and I have all the family binders sorted. They're ready to be digitized, and about 2/3 of the others. So by the time we get started doing it, then we should have them all done. The only thing that'll be a problem will be the photographs, and those will take a lot longer. One of the other things that I want to talk about is we got a message from a man named Frank Avila, very difficult, and he was interested in information on the rocket because he wants to make a model of it. And so he wanted a photograph or dimensions, and of course there's very little about the rocket anywhere. Oh, I'm sorry. The rocket was a boat. It was not a ship. It was a boat that was on Mono Lake, and it was owned by J.S. Kane, and it was part of the Mono Bodie Benton Logging Company Railroad. You know, it was a part because it was a barge. I mean, it was a boat that pulled barges, and that was what the lumber and logging was about. Anyway, it wasn't operating very long, and it ended up on the shore of Mono Lake. But lucky for us, we had in the annex, as I was going through binders, I found a paper that was done on the Bodie and Benton Railroad. That was the logging railroad that went over by Mono Mills. And he had a description with the dimensions of the rocket. It was 32 feet long, 8 feet wide, and only 32 inches tall. So it wasn't a big boat. So anyway, I found that for him, so we'll see what happens, because he said when he gets a model finished, he will give one to the museum. And then he tells me it's going to be the size of the palm of my hand. Also, we've had the recent donation of Ronald Eugene Donnelly's 1955 LVHS ski team sweater and his 1956 LVHS diploma. And so those will be put on exhibit in the schoolhouse case once I figure out how to display the sweater. And he also donated a copy of an 1891 birth certificate for Mary Felicina and a copy of a photo of the Felicina house, that one that shows it in its glory. And I think that is, oh, in April, a man contacted Dave, I believe, and Dave contacted me. He was offering some Native American baskets to the museum, to the Historical Society. And so I did speak to him today, and he does have, I'm looking for utilitarian baskets rather than the decorative ones. I'll take decorative ones, but we don't have any utilitarian ones, and we do need to have some. So he has a bottle that's covered with pitch that they use, that the basket-made pitch-covered water bottle, and a small burden basket. But he's not sure that they're Mono Basin Paiutes, so he's going to check on that, and then we'll see what happens. Maybe by next month I'll be able to tell you. Thank you.
I have a report that I have to give to you, but it'll be good news or good information. I did talk to Randy Desbaye,
who's our neighbor, who donated that, what do we call it? The old historic highway sign that from way back when they ran a road when the cars were very early out and through the forest. He went about the question of where would he like it to be, and he would like it to be outside, on the outside of the annex. He would prefer it be not get sun, so on the north side of the annex, above that window maybe. So we have to figure out how to put lag screws in or whatever. So he thanked me for asking it, letting him have his opinion on that. No.
Well, I want to thank you all so much. Now I know why the story, learning about the size of the rocket, which was the ship on Mono Lake moving the barges, it was owned by J.S. Kane. Why did he get rid of it? He gets seasick. So he got rid of the boat. I'm trying to research, get access to their private files. I'll see what I can find. Okay. Lenore's up next for a financial update of the Historical Society.
Okay, so it's a financial update and just to check in about our museum attendance. We had 442 visitors in June, down a little bit, but with all the roads closed, that's pretty good. People came from Poland, Sweden, Ireland, Germany, England, and China. Closer to home, we had visitors from Florida, Ohio, Texas, Washington State, Vermont, Nevada, and Tennessee. And right in our backyard, we had people from Bishop, June Lake, Big Pine, and Lee Vining come in to visit the museum. We collected over $500 in donations for the month of June. And we held a fundraiser on June 17th. We had the early bird breakfast. Dave and Glenda Swisher and my husband, Chris Toomey, showed up at the schoolhouse at 4:30 to serve up Robin Cassidy's homemade muffins. I should say 4:30 a.m. It was the early bird breakfast. To serve Robin Cassidy's homemade muffins, Nancy Pinizzato's quiche and sticky buns, and Epic Cafe granola yogurt parfaits to Hungry Bird Chautauqua attendees. We made $500 on that fundraiser after our expenses. Big news, Urs Williman and my husband Chris, they rebuilt the bell cupola, and it is now remounted on the old schoolhouse. So we look like a schoolhouse again, which is good news. Ellie, do you have a picture for us?
Zoom world right now is getting more than we are.
Oh, good. They can see our new bell cupola. Yes, it will be painted. It will be painted. We have a couple more projects we need to get done. The handicap ramp needs some repair and the front porch, and then we can have the entire building painted and it'll look like a brand new schoolhouse at 101 years old. The equipment for scanning the museum binders has arrived, and hopefully we'll be scanning by the end of the month. We have 3 student employees that started work, 2 of whom are very savvy computer guys. So I'm hoping that they may be interested in a scanning project. I'd like to thank Dave and Glenda, Urs, Alden, Linda, Robin, and Chris for all the hard work they did at the museum. Nicely's Epic Cafe, the Presbyterian Church, and Susan Daybelay for the contributions they made to the Burger Breakfast. And lastly, I would like to thank our very patient members and donors. We appreciate all of the support we've gotten, and it's taken me a while to get the donations to the bank. I finally made it last Friday, and I hope to have the thank you letters and donation acknowledgements out by the end of the month. That's all that's happening at the museum.
Thank you, Lenore. That is awesome. For anybody listening, you heard the terms LVHS. That's Lee Vining High School. Want to make that clear so everybody understands what that means around here. I'm going to pass it off now to Dave Carl. He has a few things to talk about, and I'm going to let him continue with that.
I can stand up wherever you want to point that camera. Where do you want me to?
There you are, or you will be in a moment.
Okay.
And
So while Rich does his technical whatever, I think just turn that camera towards me just so they can see what the nice blue shirt I wear today. So we every year we do our annual Ghosts of the Sagebrush tour, and it's this year it's the last weekend in August. August 25th is a Friday. We're going to have our dinner at the Mono Inn, and it'll be similar to what we've done in the last few years. They have a stage, they'll have speakers. If that gets when it gets dark, we hope to have a spotlight that we can work with this year that we're working on getting in order. And Saturday, this year's event is the history and hydropower in Levining Canyon. So Levining Canyon is the theme. And so the speaker for the Friday dinner is a visitation by Mr. Leroy Vining, who is the person, the 49er who ended up, the town is named for. And because it's been 160 years since he died, we've been feeding him a lot of information. We have a lot of information about the life of Leroy Vining and the works and the things he did, and also, so he'll be prepared, and I'm looking forward to a really great presentation that night. So, and on Saturday, we're going to meet. The plan is to meet at the museum in the morning, 10 o'clock. A couple of speakers to get us started in the morning. One is going to speak about the history of, it's Bob Marks, our speaker tonight. He's gonna give us a focused look at the land ownership situation in Levining Canyon, basically, if I can make it that way. And the other topic is the old Levining Ranger Station and the creation of the Mono district, at first was called. After we talk about that, we'll have some display pictures and things to look at. We will have a sack lunch, and we think we'll just do it right there for convenience and ease in the pavilion next to the museum. And then we're going to drive up into the canyon, and we will talk about these topics. We're going to, one of them is where Mr. Vining's rancho used to be, and what we think we know about that. One is the ranger station history, and we'll be able to drive in to the ranger district buildings there. There's one very old building that's still standing there that we want to talk a little bit about. And I'm going to be interviewing John Ellsworth, who's a local guy who's retired, but he just now texted me and said, I have back problems, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do your tour, but just get together and pick my brain. So that's how it's probably going to come down. Anyway, he's a good storyteller. Then we're going to go up canyon, and along the way, there's a couple of things. Camp Azusa is a historic, was privately run campground under a contract to Mono County, which had a contract with the Inyo National Forest, and it's now they're not there. We have some donated information about Camp Azusa, and so its history spans really the power plant history that we're going to finish the day talking about, up through the 1980s, and when they were shut down basically and donated everything to the museum. And then the big thing that we're trying to do, could you move this forward? By the way, note the Vining's Rancho. This is an 1861 map. And Vining's are, is this my PowerPoint that I gave you? Oh, yeah, a couple of the pictures. The big story is about the hydropower. And so the southern, yeah. Now, if you can move it forward, if it'll move. Yeah, it's the Southern Sierra Power Company came in, and by 1924 they had completed this building on the right is the pool plant. It came to be called, named after an engineer who worked on it and died in 1925. So at the beginning, it was called Lee Vining Power Plant Number 1. And what you see on the left there, if you look way down to the bottom, you can see those two buildings, and that line coming down is the drop, this incredible hydro head that comes out of Ellery Lake. And anyway, the Edison people have promised to do their best. We're going to try to get the permission to walk to the doors, open those doors, maybe not go inside because of some safety reasons, but at least look inside, because all of us, many of us have seen the outside of this place, but that'll be special. And they'll talk to us about their history. Down Canyon, then, at the same part of the same time in the 1920s, the power company that became Southern California Edison owns all this now, but this is the Southern Sierra Power Company. They built right here at the end of town where there's a substation today. They built a hydroelectric power plant, another one, and it had a dam a few miles up in Lee Vining Canyon, a low head dam relatively, and it backed up water. Go ahead and advance this. And yeah, okay. Oh, that's the ranger station. Just the old ranger station, and a picture of way back in 1920 of the ranger station. Yeah, one more. Okay, so this is the construction phase for all these power plants. They created headquarters camp, and we're going to take you there and show you. Janet has been very good at finding all these foundations and all from where these buildings were. Go ahead and advance it. And okay, this is for power plant number 3, which is the power plant that was right down here. This is before Lee Vining, right? If you know your history of Lee Vining, it was founded in 1926. And so these things are happening in 23 and 24. So in that aerial kind of, or that's not aerial, from a hillside picture, you're looking down on what they built, a power plant building. You're looking at the trees, and then going out to the left, that's where Lee Vining Creek flows. And if it had been there, the town would just be beginning to appear on the left side of that lower picture. And if you look close, you can see just a little hint of a dirt trail there. That's the road. That's the highway. And anyway, yeah. And so what on the upper right, that's the dam, the little dam that they built up in the canyon. In the winter, it had a bunch of ice on it, on their little reservoir. And after a few years, after a couple decades, actually, they finally decided in the early 50s to stop running this power plant and turn it into the substation we have today. So we're going to get this special treat from Edison. We're going to do these other things that will take us through this nearly a century of history of Lee Vining Canyon. It's going to be great. And tickets are going on sale soon. I'm looking over here. Lenore, we're getting posters made this week. No, soon? Not soon. I'll help you. I'm back. and it's time to start pushing, trying to, we usually get about 100 people, 90 to 100 at dinner, and we usually get about 60 or 70 at the tour. So that's it. Oh, and I have one more thing. I'm also the guy who organizes the speakers for these monthly meetings. And August 7th, a month from now, we have an interesting topic this year. You know that all the lakes are filling up an amazing amount with all the snow runoff. Walker Lake in Nevada has risen 12 feet this spring. Isn't that amazing? And it really needed to. The speaker is going to speak about a Pleistocene terminal lake encounters the Anthropocene. He's a college guy. He's got his big words, but it's Walker Lake, history of Walker Lake, basically. And his name's Philip Garone. He was a history professor at CSU Stanislaus. He's the chairman of the history department. And he will be here to speak on August 7th. So.
Thank you, Dave, very much for that great introduction, especially for the Ghost of the Sagebrush. It is an outstanding weekend. I urge everybody, when the tickets come on sale, contact the curator at the Mono Basin Historical Society Museum, and we'll make sure that you're in the books for a ticket. It's an exciting Friday evening and Saturday event. I look forward to these every year. So I want to thank you very much. And I think it's now time for our speaker, Mr. Marks, to come up and tell us about the wonderful land that we are standing on.
Okay, it's already on. Already on. So let's see, maybe we should, can we get these lights off? Whoa. Which one goes off? There we go. Well, I get a great view of the lake. Oh, everybody else. Before we get going, I just have one announcement about other things. On Saturday, the June Lake Historical Society is having a grand opening of its museum, which is in near the community center at 12 noon sharp. If you want to attend and see that one. So this is the title of the talk is Unceded Land, the Historical Context of the Mono Basin Historical Society's Land Acknowledgement. And the way this is going to be organized, I'm going to try to do this. Let's see. Oh, let me get my phone so I can keep track of time. This should go about, hoping no more than 40 minutes so we can leave plenty of time for comments and questions and observations. But I'm going to start with the land acknowledgement itself, explain what a land acknowledgement is, then go into the history of why the land acknowledgement is important to make in the Mono Basin. We will go along in various ways, and I'll end up in 1929. But I realized I left my props at home. So when we get toward the end, I want you to imagine that I have a rope in my hand and I'm pulling it like this, and I'm showing you how strong it is. Right? We can all imagine that, I imagine. Okay, so the other thing, Rich Foy is our technical genius over here, making sure everything works. But I know there's a number of people out zooming in to this as well. And I hope if you have questions or comments, you can put them in the chat. And we will save the chat because I think it's, yes, Rich, we will save the chat. Okay, because it'll be an important record. It'll be an important record for doing this. Oops, I don't want that. I want to go. Oh, I got to show. Point at the computer. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. So here is the language that the Mono Basin Historical Society has adopted. The first is a statement that we wrote to be read at the beginning of meetings, such as this. And the other is going to be printed and put into the museum. But I want to read these. We acknowledge that the land on which we meet is the unceded traditional land of the Kootzaduka'a people. And to be posted in the museum is the Mono Basin Historical Society acknowledges that our buildings and outdoor exhibition space are gathering places on the unceded ancestral land of the Kootzaduka'a people, the traditional caretakers of their homeland, Kootzaduka'a, which is the Mono Basin. So why? Why are we adopting a land acknowledgement? Well, there is a history here that we need to understand, acknowledge, and incorporate into the stories that we tell about the Mono Basin. And I want to bring some of that to light and talk about that. So what is a land acknowledgement? This is a definition that comes from the California Indian Culture and Sovereignty Center at Cal State San Marcos, and it's worthwhile reading. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects the indigenous peoples as traditional stewards of this land, the enduring relationships that exist between indigenous peoples and their traditional lands. This, that is the land acknowledgement, is an important part of the statement, is an act of conciliation that makes a statement recognizing the traditional land of the indigenous people who have called and still call the land home before and after the arrival of settlers. So there was a process that we went through to develop this. Last year, Dave Carl and I brought the idea to the board to consider, and the board then created a committee of 4 people, Dave Carl, Barry McPherson, Janice Mendez, and me, and then we worked for 2 months or so coming up, looking at various examples and coming down to the ones that we showed you here. And in January, we went to the tribal council and explained to them the process that we've been through and what the language was, and had some pretty interesting discussion at that point as well. And then we moved forward at the May board meeting, and the board at that time adopted those 2 statements. So it's been a formal process about a year or so, not quite a year, from last November or so. So the critical term in the acknowledgement is the term unceded land. Now, I want to start by saying, well, what is ceded land then, right? We'll start there and then we'll go to unceded land. Ceded land is land that is transferred from one person or a body to another, usually as a result of political pressure or war or defeat in war, and it cedes land and power to someone else. Mostly ceded land was done so by treaty ending a war. The Mexican-American War of 1848, California, the Mexican government ceded that back to the United States. Along Arizona, there's ceded land there as well. The Spanish-American War of 1898, another example. And there are 335 treaties between the U.S. government and Native peoples, Native nations, from the founding of the United States in 1783. Now, this map comes from a very recent book by Ned Blackhawk, The Rediscovery of American Native Peoples and the Unmaking of U.S. History. But what the black square or crosses are places where there have been treaties ratified. And I want you to look at California here. Whoops. Back, please. There are no treaties transferring land, ceding land from Native peoples to the U.S. government. All of these diamonds in here are U.S. cavalry military forts, 19th century forts. So the presence of the military in California was important, and I'll talk about that as well. But no treaties, no ceded land in California. So it wasn't ceded. So how did it get transferred from the people who lived here into other hands? And I'll explain that a little bit more as well. But basically, the land was taken. It's a pretty simple part of the story. The gold rush brought tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, miners, settlers, ranchers, farmers clamoring for land and water into California. And in an extraordinarily difficult book to read, that was an award-winning book by Ben Madley, a professor of history at UCLA, called An American Genocide, the United States and the Californian Indian Catastrophe, 1846 to 1873. He details the 25 years of wars conducted by settlers, by vigilantes, by the U.S. military in California, starting from the north, coming from Oregon, going down through the Central Valley, going down through all the mining districts, getting to Southern California in what is now Los Angeles, going around the Southern Sierras and then up into the Owens Valley and ending in with 2 wars in the Owens Valley in the 1860s. But the point is that there were wars and there were no treaties ending the wars. So how did the land get transferred? Oh, before we do that, I want to get to one of the other aspects of both the wars and the conditions before that. That is what happened to the population of all the native peoples in the borders of California. And this this chart deals with the period from about 1800 to 1900. And you see that there's, in 1800, there might have been 300,000 native people spread throughout California. And by the time California becomes a state in the US, the population has dropped to about 100,000. Now that population decline is a result both of the rigors of the Spanish mission system, which constrained the growth of populations and in fact contributed to decline, and also the bringing of various European diseases in what another historian has called the Columbian Exchange, where vast numbers of diseases that native peoples had no experience with, influenza, smallpox, etc., brought down the population. But from the time California's state was established in the year 1849, maybe 100,000 native peoples. And by the time, well, we're going to get to about here, when the wars against them end, well, we're down to about 20,000 total. And estimate is by 1900, there are only 15,000 or so native peoples left in California, which means that there is a significant collapse in the population. Now, whoops, gotta get here. So how many native peoples were in the Mono Basin? And what we have, anthropologists have estimated the carrying capacity, how many people could have been here, at somewhere between 200 and 300 people living in various parts around the basin. But there are three censuses that we can use to begin to construct more completely the population. There's the U.S. Census, and like the U.S. Census today and in previous years, there's probably a significant undercount of native peoples, of people who weren't white Euro-American white settlers. But there were two other censuses, one taken by C.E. Kelsey, and I'll mention the Northern California Indian Association, that was done in 1905, 1906. And they came up with, let's go forward, came up with about 100 people in 27 households in the Mono Basin. You can look out here and see. The Bishop Agency, first census that the Bishop Indian Agency made, had about 182 individuals in 30 households, and then it grows a bit by 1927. But these are probably undercounts as well, because the movement of people around from here up to Benton, over to Benton, up to Bodie, and other places was rather dramatic, and down into the basin as well. But if you can think about what the basin would have looked like 200 years ago, 1820 or so, there's no European American settlers. There's nobody else here. There's just the Kootzaduka'a people, and probably something on the order of 30 to 50 households, and somewhere around 250 to 300 people. And the Kootzaduka'a people have been in the basin for millennia. The archaeological evidence is absolutely clear on that. And they had an annual round of food. They started over here in the spring and summer. This is Rush Creek. Here's Lee Binding Creek. Mill Creek is up here. And nearly all of this area is pretty arid. There's no fresh water except for a spring over here or so. And they developed a way of gaining their sustenance from the land and from Mono Lake as well, that stood by them and allowed them to sustain their culture, their populations for well over 1,000 years in this area. An early anthropologist said the Kootzaduka'a, to do that, the Kootzaduka'a had an encyclopedic knowledge of the ecology of which they formed a part. In other words, they had a fairly sustainable relationship to the land for well over 1,000 years. So, what happened? how did the land in the Mono Basin get transferred into the hands of Euro-American settlers? And basically, the instrument for doing that was the land survey. Dave Carl has done a book on von Schmidt, the surveyor who was in the basin in 1855, 1856. Dave's book is called Putting California on the Map. But basically, this was taking the idea that you could put lines on the map in a system known as the township and range system. Each of these squares is a mile square, and so you got in a township there are 36. It's 6 miles by 6 miles, and there are 36 sections in it, and you can precisely locate pieces of property on that grid so that you don't have conflicts over whose land is whose. You know, you can know exactly what's what. And so von Schmidt did these, and I want to show, this one is, here's Rush Creek. He called it Lake Creek at the time. This is Parker Creek here, and we've got Walker Creek there, and he didn't get much of Lee Vining Creek surveyed at the time. Right, so what that is, that survey is you can think of it as an administrative net that the US government tossed, in this case, over the Mono Basin, and used it to capture, divide up, and make manageable units of property out of what had been this wholly unified area that was used by the Kootzaduka'a for about a millennium. And not only were the pieces of property manageable, I mean, the idea was to make it possible for this land to be transferred to Euro-American settlers by a large number of means. So there's a long story here of how we got this map. I mean, I did the map, but from the period from 1872 to 1925, the US government transferred ownership of land in the Mono Basin to Euro-American settlers. And this first transfer of what was then called, they didn't call it Kootzaduka'a land, they called it public land because it had become under the jurisdiction of the US government. The first transfer is known as a land patent. And so you can get online, the Bureau of Land Management has the patents for basically the entire US, and you can search it and do everything else to it. But I pulled out and used 79 patents for all of these areas. And these are all the squares that I mapped on there, right? And there are a couple out here, but it's really difficult to get onto the map that I made here. But just to look at who the patent holders were, Euro-American males, 88%. Women had patents to 12 of them. By the way, we have some students from Claremont here, and the land that the Claremont Research Center, what is it called now, Jill? Research Center, up the grade a bit, was a land patent that was granted to Sarah Noyes. So we don't know much about Sarah Noyes. Maybe you can learn a little bit more about it. And then I'm going to turn quickly to, you can see that there are 10 land patents granted to Paiutes. And this is the name that the U.S. state began giving to the Kootzaduka'a because it was an attempt to make sense out of the part of the world that they were moving into. But that's what they called them, spelled two different ways as well. And what you can tell here, this is Rush Creek Drainage Basin. This is Lee Vining. The most of the patents are where there's water. If you haven't noticed, this is a pretty arid space around here. So water was important. Here's Mill Creek. And then up here to the north, there's a lot of springs and other water that comes up through the ground that can be tapped, and it's running, and you can get wells and do other things. So the land is not as valuable in the Mono Basin as water. And we'll get to that in a little bit as well. But before I I'm going to be focusing on this township. This is 1 north, 26 east. And so you won't be able to see, I'll talk about the land allotments to Paiutes, Indians. There are 2 that aren't in here on this one, but one is down here. This is Joe McLaughlin's. This is Grant Lake. And his allotment is about a mile downstream on Rush Creek. Then the other one is up here to the north. This is the allotment of a man by the name of Captain John. And I'll talk a little bit about him as well, but and why his is out there where there's no water. Okay, so if you think about this, anybody happy about some other group coming in and taking your land? You know, no. So, you know, the Kootzaduka'a are pretty normal people. And there was resistance of various kinds to the taking of their land. Kootzaduka'a, you know, all of those pieces of property, to get those homesteads had to prove that they were being made into productive land. So they were fenced. There was a lot of barbed wire being laid across the basin, and farmers don't want other people taking up their land. So the Kootzaduka'a were literally pushed into the margins of the Mono Basin. If they didn't flee, get this going. Some fled into the mountains. But we learn a little bit about what happened from a memoir, Ella Kane's memoir, tells Captain John's story. Captain John was a Kootzaduka'a Paiute who in the 1870s was chosen by his people to be the leader of the Kootzaduka'a, of the Paiute people in the Mono Basin. Apparently his father was elderly and not as strong in saying, we resist, we don't want you taking our land. And so they chose this young man. He was probably born in about 1850. So in 1875, he's 25 years old. But he tells the story that Ella Kane then relates, that Captain John was first, had some land over here by Rush Creek, and some guy comes by in a wagon and waves a piece of paper in his face and says, get out of here, this is now my land. And so he moves a little further north, and another guy comes by with a piece of paper. Well, these are, you know, the Homestead Act papers, waving in his face and saying, this is my land now, get out of here. And so he said, I'm going someplace where nobody's going to want to get rid of me. So he chose that 80 acres up there on the north side that doesn't have any water on the land whatsoever. And that's where he went. But the Kootzaduka'a, to maintain their lives, that annual round of hunting and gathering and using the natural resources was completely disrupted because of the private land ownership and the transfer into the hands of the Euro-American settlers. And so they had virtually no ways to maintain their traditional ways of life. And so most became workers on settler ranches and farms, and then sawmills. There were several sawmills along Lee Vining Creek, Mill Creek, and especially Mono Mills. And a number of others migrated to Bodie, Benton, Round Valley down in the Owens Valley, and up to Nevada as well. We have one or two documents of what the Kootzaduka'a were trying to do to try to push back against the incursions in their homeland. And this comes from, this statement comes from the 1987 Bodie Weekly. Bodie is, for those of you who don't know, I think everybody does, it's the mining area just to the north of us here. Men, that is men from Bodie, chopping wood on the eastern side of Mono Lake have been threatened by the Paiute Indians in that vicinity, who swear that they will shoot every white squaw among them if they do not quit work, clear out, and leave them in sole possession. Right? Now, there really wasn't much, and the Kootzaduka'a had learned this, there wasn't really much pushback that they could do because they were just simply outnumbered and outmanned and outgunned. The presence of the U.S. military in the Eastern Sierra had been made known as early as 1852. There had been a war in the Yosemite Valley called the Mariposa War, where the U.S. took the Yosemite Valley from the peoples who were there. Miwok, maybe. There was a very close relationship between the people of the Yosemite Valley and the people in the Mono Basin as well. Chief Tenaya, who led the groups in Yosemite, was born in the Mono Basin. His father was from over the other side from the Yosemite area, but his mother was a Kootzaduka'a woman. So he's half and half. Anyway, Tenaya mounted a pretty good resistance, but he was captured and thrown into a makeshift reservation in Fresno and escaped. He just didn't, he was treated horribly there. And so he escaped and took his people over Bloody Canyon Pass right behind us and fled into the Mono Basin area, where the Kootzaduka'a hid him and his members. But he was followed then by Major Treadwell Moore, who chased Tenaya and his people through the pass and down into the Mono Basin. Didn't find him because the Kootzaduka'a hid their comrades fairly well, and he went back. And apparently didn't use any force in the Mono Basin. In 1859, Captain Davidson came from Fort Tejon. He was tasked with finding stolen horses. And so he had a battalion of something on the order of 30 to 40 men who came into the Owens Valley looking for horses that had been stolen, never found any, but he had a well-armed group, including he had a howitzer with him just in case, and to demonstrate the power of the howitzer, he exploded several shells into and across Owens Lake. It used to be known as Owens Lake. It had its own name, but it became a lake. It was then drained. Became Owens Dry Lake. It's now Owens Moist Lake. It's wetter this time of the year this year than others. But then there's two real serious wars in the Owens Valley. The first one in 1862, 1863, and then 1864-65. And in the second Owens Valley War, and this comes from Ben Madley's work. I mean, it's a pretty amazing stories. But the leader of the resistance in Round Valley was a guy by the name of Joaquin Jim, and Joaquin Jim and his troops were chased up onto the shores of Mono Lake by the U.S. cavalry out of Fort Independence, and were killed. Owens Lake, and were killed. So, what did Kootzaduka'a think about the dispossession from their land? And we have a really interesting document here. This is entitled Yosemite Petition to the United States, about 1891. And you can Google this. This comes from the Yosemite National Park. And this is presented and written by the headmen of the existing remnants of the tribes of the Yosemite, the Mono, and the Paiute Indians. And I want to show you that there's reason why we can think that this statement about Yosemite also applies to the Mono Basin and what the Kootzaduka'a are thinking. Said it unjustifiably conquered, taken from us by whites, and we petition and pray your excellency, the president, and your honorable bodies, that means Congress if you can believe it, but it is, assembled to hear, deliberate upon, and give us relief for the following reasons. There's about 5 pages of the petition, and I'm only going to read the first to wit. First, we as Indians and survivors of the aforementioned tribes declare that we were unfairly and unjustly deprived of our possessions in land, made to labor in the interest of the whites with no recompense, subjected to continual brutality, wrong, and outrage at the hands of the whites, and were continually driven from our homes into strange localities, and that our few retaliatory acts were feeble and deserving of no notice in comparison to the gross injustices and outrages that we were continually subjected to. Now we have, this is not the original, this has been transcribed. And before, well, I'll get to the signatories here. The previous page has the signatures of Yosemite Indians, but I want to point out to you that the signatories of this petition include Captain John, Shabana, and then 4 other men whose names I haven't been able to find anything about these guys. But then there are also women who are signatories to these petitions. And these women here are all identified by a later scholar over in Yosemite as being Paiutes from Mono Basin. And this woman here has been identified as Captain John's daughter. Okay, so they're signatories. Now, you'd think that a petition submitted to the president and the Congress would have gotten there and they would have done something, but the superintendent of Yosemite apparently received the petition, put it in his drawer of his desk, and left it there. It went nowhere until it was found sometime later. But anyway, we get some idea of what Captain John and the Kootzaduka'a are thinking about what was happening to them at this time. So by 1900, oh, I should go back. I should tell you what the signatories, what that petition, what they wanted. They didn't want to necessarily get the land back because they said the whites have thoroughly ruined it. They've trashed it. They've destroyed it. We don't actually need it back. What we want is to be compensated for it up to the tune of $1 million. And they would have called that fair trade, but didn't happen. So by 1900, in the Mono Basin and elsewhere in California, most native peoples are landless. They have no land. They have no rights to land. They've been pushed off their land. And a group known as the Northern California Indian Association began investigating. This was led by a San Jose lawyer. Don't ever say lawyers don't do anything good, because this guy did. Began visiting every one of the counties in Northern California and conducted a census to see how many they were and how landless they were. He also lobbied Congress to give the Northern California Indian Association, I think it was something on the order of $250,000, to help landless Indians begin to buy land in the new land market. Right? That's what happened. Those manageable pieces of property, that's what the land surveys did, is they made a land market and to buy some of this land. And what Kelsey found is that there were about 536 Indians in Mono, and then twice that many in Inyo. And as I said, this is all of Mono County, and there are probably 250 or so in the Mono Basin. And the thing to pay attention to here is not only are they landless, but these are all non-reservation Indians. It means their land has been taken and they haven't been pushed onto reservations because there aren't any reservations. They're just landless. So Kelsey and the Northern California Indian Association begin to figure out, how can we begin to address the problem of landlessness, Indian landlessness in California? And what they take advantage of is what's known as the General Allotment or Dawes Act of 1887. Now, this was an act that gave the U.S. government power. You know, think about the rest of the United States and all the reservations where the native peoples had ceded their land. You know, all of eastern Colorado, for example, was ceded by the Utes and the Arapaho to the U.S. government, and they got two reservations out of it. The land in all these reservations was held collectively by the nation to which ceded it. And what the Dawes Act did was it made it possible for the U.S. government to unilaterally, without the agreement of the tribes, go in and break it up into those manageable pieces of property and sell it. Some of it was sold to the Indians on those reservations, but a lot of it was made available to waves of Euro-American settlers moving west. And it was specifically designed to break up the reservations. And there seems to have been a fairly good effort at doing so. And also, and we've learned more about this over the last 5 years or so, about the Indian schools throughout the United States, and we learned about it from the work that Canadians have done on First Nations and all the schools there, and what that meant. Assimilation, to acculturate Indians to the benefits and rigors of farming, the system of private property, and individual responsibility. In other words, all these people were to become no longer wards of the state, but to be responsible for their own fates. Now, the thing is that this the Dawes Act, the General Allotment Act, has a section that extends allotments to any Indian not residing upon a reservation shall make settlement upon any surveyed or unsurveyed land of the United States not otherwise appropriated, shall be entitled upon application to the local land office to have the same allotted to him or her. And somebody might want to ask me about the her part of this at some point. The land office here, there was one in Bodie for a little while, but the main land office was in the Owens Valley in Independence. So, from 1907 to 1920, there are 10 Paiutes, Kootzaduka'a, who apply for and receive land allotments in the Mono Basin. And I want to talk about this just a little bit. The first wave of 7 was done in 1907. They all received their allotments in 1907. And then by 1920, there were 3 more. Now, Joe McLaughlin, he's the guy who's got his allotment down here. And Captain John's got his up there in the dry lands up there. But the process was that these individuals had to apply, and they had some help at the Bishop School, Indian School in Bishop, and the Bishop Indian Agency there to do the paperwork to be able to get a 160-acre allotment given to them. And so the first tranche, these first 7, all received their land allotments in September of 1907. And if you look at these allotments, I think you can see they all have something in common. You know, water, right? And I have other maps that show all the settler lands all around them. Now, this is only in the Mono Basin. There were more allotments in Mono County as well. Some over Sagehen Summit, some down at Hot Creek, and then further on down on the border between Mono and Inyo counties. And then there's a whole bunch more in the Owens Valley as well. So the thing is that these allotments, unlike the land that was transferred into the hands of the Euro-American settlers who owned the land outright, they owned it outright. These lands were held in trust by the U.S. government. So the allottees did not have outright ownership. And they were also, by the Burke Act of 1906, they're not citizens anymore, not citizens of the U.S. The allottees' land and their bodies were under federal jurisdiction and to a certain extent protection. I'm not going to go into this, but this is the most important water rights case in the Mono Basin. And those allotment holders on Rush Creek were all served papers and were sued by J.S. Kane, who wanted to gain control over all the water and land in the Mono Basin, which he did, and I'll come back to that. So they hold their land in trust. And the U.S. did put enough lawyerly behind the five who were in that Rush Creek case that it went all the way up to the Attorney General of the United States, who intervened in it, trying to make sure that the allottees had their water rights protected, and they did. So, all right. So, to be free and equal, I have two stories for this 4th of July coming from the words and from the voices of two of these allotment holders. One is Henry Jameson. His allotment is up here on Lee Vining Creek. And if you think about the map that Dave showed of where Lee Vining's ranchero was, Lee Vining's ranchero was right about there. So they were contiguous. And then Bridgeport Tom has his allotment down here on Walker Creek, which is a tributary of Rush Creek. So Henry Jameson, he's one of the first to confront the limitations of what it meant for his land to be held in trust for 25 years by the U.S. government. Now, here we go, Kane Irrigation Company, yeah, right. So what we have here is a rather extraordinary letter. This is a letter from Kane Irrigation Company to Ray Perrett, who is the Indian agent in Bishop, California. All of those allottees had their lands and their lives controlled basically from the Indian agency in Bishop. And Perrett is here. So they're writing to Perrett saying, we got our Mr. Kane, our representative at Mono Lake, got a letter to us from Henry Jameson. And what Henry is asking here is he's asking that J.S. Kane buy his land. And you say, well, why does Henry want to sell his land? I'm not going to read this whole letter, but some of it is rather extraordinary. His son is sick, probably deathly sick. The influenza pandemic had reached north of us, and there were people who died in the Mono Basin from influenza. I want to take my sick boy to a white doctor, Indian doctor. You know, it costs so much to travel. So he wanted in effect to get a loan secured on his land so he could take his son to a doctor. And he says to Kane, you know, I can sure pay you back the $100 next summer. This is all I'm thinking for this time. I hear you'll be here at Mono Lake in a short time, and be sure to come over to my place. I want to see you when you come here. Be sure to answer me tonight. Right? Now, don't know what happened exactly because there isn't any more documentation on this. But Henry understood that he could not sell his land to J.S. Kane, even if he wanted to. He couldn't do much to raise money to save his son. So he learned from another man in the basin that there was another process by which he could petition to have his land that was held in trust transferred to land in fee, transferred to patent in fee or outright ownership so that he could do anything he wanted to do with it. If he wanted to mortgage it to raise money for additional crops, additional tools, he could do that. If he wanted to mortgage it so he could get his son to a doctor, he could do that. But he had to go through paperwork to be able to do it. And this is Ray Perrett, who is overseeing all of this. But it's a 3 or 4 page application. And I just want to read the last part here, where Henry is asked to set forth fully your reasons for requesting a patent and fee. Want to have patent and fee in my own name. I want to be free. I want to be free. I want to be free to manage my own affairs. That's, I find that extraordinary. Rather extraordinary. And the two witnesses, one is Fee Foster. He's another allottee. He's the one who first did this, went through this process, and probably told Henry about it. And then here's Harry Jameson. Harry is Henry's son. So I presume it's the son who was ill, and I presume everything was okay, and he came through it. So now I want to turn to, again, language from Bridgeport Tom. He's on the upper reaches of Walker Creek. There's a couple photos of him. This is Bridgeport Tom and his family around 1902. This was probably taken at what was known as the Indian Village in Yosemite. And here's Henry. This is Henry back here. Not Henry. This is Tom here. And over here, this is Tom over there with some of his family. Probably around 1930 and probably up around Colville. So Bridgeport Tom was not just simply a successful rancher and farmer. He was probably one of the most successful ranchers and farmers in the Mono Basin. His allotment on Walker Creek was near the foot of Bloody Canyon, access to Yosemite. He had lots of connections with Yosemite. He and his family had many. His land was generally considered to be the most productive in the basin, not just among the Paiute Alati holders, but in the basin. He raised alfalfa, wheat, barley, vegetables. He had herds of cattle and horses. He was known as the area's best wrangler and horse raiser. He would take his horses down to Bishop during the fair to sell his horses. They were taken up to Schurz in Nevada. This guy was something. He also had a fairly large amount of presence in the Yosemite Valley. He was an impresario. He was known as a medicine man. He's a really extraordinary guy. But in 1925, and I don't know the reason why, if there was anything precipitating it, he applied to have his allotment assigned to him outright as a patented fee. And the Ray Perrette, who oversaw the paperwork, valued his land at $15,000. So here we have, this is the report. And here's that question number 27. Set forth fully your reasons for requesting a patented fee. Now listen to what he says. Now somebody's taking down his words, but these are Tom's words. I think from my experience in farming and stock raising and from the amount of property I have accumulated by my own efforts, it's astounding that I am competent to manage my own business affairs. I believe I am just as capable of managing my business as my neighbors, both white, Indian and white. I'm equal. Right? August 21st, 1925. So there's a long story here, but all of the allottees get their land transferred into fee simple so that they own it outright. And that means that it can be sold. And pretty soon, in the 1920s, all of these allotments are sold. Now, what happens? Extremely long story here, but this has to do with the struggle over water and control over water in the Mono Basin between J.S. Kane and his companies, including the Southern Sierras Power Company, which is building all the hydro plants, and the city of Los Angeles. So Joe McLaughlin, who was the first one to sell his land, he was approached by the city of Los Angeles to buy his land in 1922 or 1923. And so McLaughlin goes to the Indian agent in Bishop and says, somebody wants to buy my land. Can I sell it to him? And Parrott says, well, no, but I can organize an auction. And so Perrette organizes an auction and solicits bids. Their bids are posted in the newspaper. And there are 3 or 4 bidders, but basically it's the city of Los Angeles and then Kane irrigation companies are bidding for it. And something goes wrong, and there's some, what could possibly go wrong with an auction involving the city of Los Angeles and Kane irrigation. But Perrette smells something bad, and he says, okay, I'm going to redo it. The first round, the winning bid was $4,000 from the city of Los Angeles. Perrette redid it, and ultimately it was Kane Irrigation Company that bid $7,500, and the land was transferred into their hands. Now, all of the rest of these, Sierra Construction Company, NevCalcis series, these are all affiliated with the building of the hydroelectric plants. The electricity distribution network, the construction, all of that. These two, Elizabeth Farrington, Arch Farrington was one of the largest landowners in the basin, and he had a number of secret arrangements with Kane, shall we say. And what's happening here is that by 1926, 1927, it becomes clear again that the city of Los Angeles is interested in getting the water out of the Mono Basin. And they want to buy it if they can. They wanted to just use eminent domain and have it condemned. But Kane and his companies got a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles and had it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in 1922, the lawsuit said, well, the city of Los Angeles cannot condemn the property of another public utility, which Southern Sierras Powers was. So Los Angeles couldn't condemn the properties that Kane, by 1923, Kane says, I've got 80% of the land and 99% of all the water rights in the Mono Basin. And so all these folks, I think what's happening is these folks are being approached by Kane companies to say, look, the city of Los Angeles could condemn your property unless you sell it to us. And we will put it underneath all of the public utilities so it can't be condemned. And so they do so. And I think the Farringtons ultimately sell their land to Kane as well, Kane companies. In 1923, after the Kane companies got McLaughlin's land, they made an offer to sell all of their land and water holdings in the LA Basin, including a hydro plant in the Owens Gorge, for the small price of $7 million. And the city of Los Angeles walked away from it at that point. They turned to a Boulder Canyon project and to getting water from the Colorado River. And we know how that has come out, sort of. So what happens is they sell all this, and in 1930, the Kane companies, they're known as the Associated Companies, make another offer to sell all their holdings in the Mono Basin to the city of Los Angeles for $7.5 million. And that offer was accepted after some negotiation in 1933. And that's how the water gets transferred to Los Angeles. And all these folks have a role in it. Now, there are lots of narratives about the Mono Basin. These are threads. And now here's where I want you to begin thinking about the prop that I don't have. Got stories about the Kootzaduka'a, right? Euro-American settlers, immigrant labor. I haven't even mentioned Chinese and Mexicans. Water in the environment, Los Angeles DWP, power. All of these things are numerous threads in the history of the Mono Basin. But when those threads are all woven together, imagine a rope, boom, stronger together, right? One of those doesn't need to be privileged over all the others. We have to take them all into context and to weave them together in a way that makes an inclusive, stronger narrative of the Mono Basin. So that gets us back to the land acknowledgement. And to learn more, I can see you're taking notes already, but if you want to learn more, a couple of sources. Here's a book that was recently published, 2018, I think, called Voices of the People, the Traditionally Associated Tribes of the Yosemite National Park. There's a chapter in there by the Mono Lake Kootzaduka'a tribe on them and their place in the Mono Basin. This is available for $25. You can get it at the Mono Lake Committee, right? We got it over the bookstore. It's in there. And then in my shameless self-promotion, I also published an article that most of this is based on, called Dispossessed Again, Pilot Land Allotments in the Mono Basin, 1907, 1929, in a journal called the Eastern Sierra History Journal. And I think our students from Claremont might have noticed that where does this come from? Scholarship, claremont.edu, right? And this is article, volume 4, article number 1. So thank you very much. So, comments, questions?
Thank you for sending in the chats. Bob, let's go for it.
Okay. Called Diggers, Yosemite. Brown Valley. Okay, so it's not in, thank you, Raymond. All right. Any other comments, questions, observations?
I think some discussion as to your choice of spelling for Kootzaduka'a is
Oh, yeah.
probably a little controversial in this group.
Okay, so the spelling is, there have been various ways of spelling the sounds of Kootzaduka'a, and that's gone through a number of variations. But the version that we have is the one used and preferred by the tribe now. That is their spelling.
And the pronouncement is Kootzaduka'a.
Kootzaduka'a. Yep. Cole, you had a.
Yeah, this is a little off topic, but are you aware of any die-off in the West Coast Indians before the ones that you had, was the 1850s? Because European diseases swept
Yes.
through the
Yeah.
Rockies much earlier.
Yeah, there's been quite a bit of work done on that. I mean, these are all estimates, but yes, I'm not into that literature, but there is considerable amount on it. But yes, it's the diseases, coming all the way from the east, going through the Great Plains and out into across the Rockies and into the West Coast. Major impact.
Are there any questions from our guests in the back? Oh, we have a question back there. Hang on just a moment.
I noticed that throughout the talk you used the term Indian
Yes.
rather than Native American. I know there's some controversy over
Yes, there
that,
is.
and yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say about that.
There's so many different ways of parsing that. In the case of California, the argument that that Ben Madley made is that it's, and there are various other peoples who say that this is okay, is to use the term California Indians to refer to the entire group. And then I mean, we can use the words not just simply Native peoples. We have Indigenous peoples, and there's various ways of thinking and using that language. I think in my case, when I use the word either Paiute or Paiute spelled with either an I or an A, or Indians, I'm using the language that is used in the sources. So you can, that's the language in the sources. And if you, there's quite a bit of interesting work done on that. I can read what Ben Madley has to say about the rationale for using the term California Indians, and also his defense of the use of the word genocide.
And we have another question from Eli.
Yeah.
I was wondering, you said that you went to the tribal council to help draft the statement. I was wondering if you learned anything there, how the statement may have changed after going there.
The discussion turned rather interestingly into a question of not simply recognition of land, but of land itself. And the more recent attempts to gain land back, which, you ask how is that possible? But it is. So that was on the agenda. But when we finished the meeting with them and we went through the discussion, there wasn't any position that we could take on the question of land back. It's a land acknowledgement. But we do understand and know that the Kootzaduka'a tribe has been trying since 2018 to get federal recognition as a tribe. They're not federally recognized at the moment. So the first time was when we were in the district, I think it was California 8, was Obernolte. Paul Cook first did that. Then it was Obernolte, Jay Obernolte, and now we're redistricted into the California 3rd. And I don't know if there's been any work done in getting another act before Congress. The problem is that every time Congress goes out of business, all the legislation that's been proposed has to be reintroduced. Yeah.
On a personal note, I confronted Mr. Obernolte down in Mammoth nose to nose about this situation. And he was very politically correct in trying to avoid answering what I wanted. But it was definitely nose to nose when I confronted him. And I plan on doing it with a new one also.
Dave
Carl.
I don't want to say something that is accurate, but we've heard that Burger's Retreat has been sold to the tribe, that they found some grant money and that I don't know if it's an escrow or where that process is, but that's some land that they maybe are acquiring.
Heard the rumors. Are there a couple other questions back here? Yeah.
Daniel.
Yes, my name is Daniel. This was a really nice presentation, so thank you. It was really interesting to see kind of different efforts for land back, I guess across California. But I was just kind of wondering, like, you guys doing the land acknowledgement, I was just kind of wondering, like, how popular that is kind of like in this town or in this region among people living here, like popular it is to like recognize the Kootzaduka'a people as like the original inhabitants of this land and like recognizing them and honoring them.
Well, we are in the Lee Vining Indian and Community Center, and the tribal offices are right around the corner.
They're right next door.
Right over there. That's an interesting question. Well, we'll find out when we put it up.
We plan on having a sign made with these statements and putting it outside of our museum. So every visitor that walks in will be reading the statement. Okay. Liz?
Thank you so much for this presentation. The Claremont students very diligently read all three of the articles that you cited. And actually, the one article that I found the most kind of like mind-blowing was the one about the antelope specifically, because for me, it was kind of like looking at Bill Cronin's work in this particular region instead of the Northeast. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that sort of relationship between land management, indigenous land management, and the antelope and changes in the land, except here.
Right. Well, am I still on? Yes. Okay. So I didn't mention this much, but the pronghorn antelope are migratory species, and they've for longer than we can imagine have been coming over the Anchorite Pass through in Nevada and into the Mono Basin around the eastern shore and then moving off further to the south. And the thing about these antelope is that they are damn fast. They're the fastest land animals in North America, but they can't jump. Okay. So unlike the mule deer, which can go over everything, they can't jump. And so the Kootzaduka'a developed traps to be able to drive the pronghorn sheep or pronghorn antelope into traps. And those archaeological evidence of those are all on the east side of the lake over there. And some of these were larger than football fields, and could drive them into the traps. And as best we can tell, there is evidence that some of the antelope killed by the Kootzaduka'a after they're driven into those traps were females. Some of them were pregnant females because there are fetuses that were also killed. But one can imagine that that they had a sense that you don't want to kill off all the antelope coming through, because they've been the evidence of those traps over there. The earliest one is dated around by carbon dating is about 500 AD, so 1500 years ago. And there are three more over there as well. So at least 1500 years, the Kootzaduka'a have been trapping pronghorn antelope. Now, what happened is that with the Euro-American settlers came sheep. And within a very short period of time, by 1880, sheep had basically destroyed the food sources of the antelope. And if you can imagine this, there were 200 to 300,000 sheep in the Mono Basin in 1880. Munching down all the.
And if you're interested in antelope, get out in the morning, go up Highway 270 towards Bodie. There's two large herds out there.
Yeah.
And look to your right and your left, mainly to your right when you come down the first Green Valley. And they're beautiful out there. And talking about the sheep, there was how many? 200
to 300,000.
200 to 300,000. Why was there so many sheep around here? Anybody have any ideas? Bodie took 600 sheep a month.
The herds up in the Bodie Hills, by the way, were reintroduced by in the 1960s.
Great.
Bob, we have a couple of new questions
Yeah.
on chat. Dewey Livingston asks, did the allotment holders get the money from the sales to Kane at all?
As far as we know, yes. We have evidence of, again, this comes from the Bishop Indian Agency and the role that they had in making sure that the money was deposited in banks and then got into the hands of the allottees. But what we don't know is exactly how much all those allotments sold for, because the deeds that are in the Bridgeport archives say that it was sold for $10. And no, but all of them say it was for $10. And if you can think about it, it was probably when they became outright ownership, they had to pay taxes. And you know, if it's worth $10, you're not going to pay a whole lot of taxes on it. Gee, I wonder where they got that idea.
Dean asks, what groups are supporting the California Indians?
What groups? Maybe Dean can.
Yeah, Dean, I think
clarify that a little bit.
And Mr. Meaden says, I joined in late. Can the land statement be posted? It shall be posted. It shall be shown every time we have one of these meetings. Tonight is the
first
grand opening.
Yes. Yes, that is the intent.
We waited until it's a nice meeting before we were able to display it at the museum, have signs made, and acknowledge it before every meeting.
Jill, you had a question? Comment?
State of California has money that is being asked for tribes to buy land. So there's some group at the state level of our state to answer one of Dean's questions.
Yeah, I don't know. Then we have another question over here.
Hi, yeah, I was wondering about whatever came of Captain John, because he didn't have very valuable land, and so it wasn't bought by Kane, and his name wasn't on the list of the people that sold their allotments. So was that land later sold, or were any of the people who originally had allotted land, like, did they pass that on or no?
Yeah, so you notice that Captain John did not sell his land. He died in 1923. Again, this is just from the documents in the land documents. In 1966, the documentation says that a non-Indian heir got ownership of the land. And what has happened since then, I don't know, because it's the documentation isn't there. And I thought about asking the Mono County Assessor's Office and to do a title search, and they, cost $500 to get to do a title search. So I don't know where that is at this point. Dave?
Dave Carl.
Well, all this is on. I'm working on an environmental history of the Mono Basin. And I got 4 articles out, and I'm probably going to end it in 1941 when the water is all diverted to Los Angeles. But I'm going through the draft environmental impact statement for the 1994 hearing, And there's so much interesting stuff in there about what happened. Let me just give you one example. This is the hearing that led to the finding that Los Angeles couldn't take all the water, that they had to leave enough going into the lake to bring it up to the level that it was in 1960 at 6392. And we haven't ever gotten there. Now where was I going with that? Oh, where the book is going, where the book is going. And so the hearing got there, you know, there's biologists and hundreds of people testifying about what damage the diversion of water from the city by the city of Los Angeles did to the Mono Basin. Now, the city of Los Angeles' defense, and their statement was, hey, wait a minute. All these people who were here before us, the Kootzaduka'a, the Paiutes, the landowners, they're the ones who did all this. The sheep, the horses, the cattle, they're the ones who did all the damage to the environmental damage first. So you can't hold us responsible for that. Anyway, I don't know if I'm going to end it in 1941 or where it's going to be, but I've got more to do. Got to do work on mining, logging, logging, and sheep raising as well. So there's a lot of work to do.
There's some comments here. Captain Jack, you might.
His daughter said that he is buried out there. Yep.
All of our links to our meetings are on the website via YouTube.
Yeah.
monobasinhistory.org. So
Okay.
there are no other questions. Great thanks to Mr. Marks. What an outstanding job of research and presentation he gave to us of the history that is needed for this area that we'll now continue. He's just given us the tools to continue it all the way through to the end and make sure everyone in the basin is aware of the Kootzaduka'a tribe and why we are here and where we are going. So next month's meeting is in August. Please stay tuned for the updates on that. There'll be another great meeting, but thank you for attending us. Remember, we do take donations at the curator at the Mono Basin History Museum, because that's what keeps the Mono Basin Historical Society afloat. So if you're on Zoom, we would love to have some donations, and thank you so much. Have a great night and a happy and safe 4th of July.